Today's story is inspired by something I personally experienced. So let's dive into today's creepy tale. This happened when I had just started a new job. The job was in a city 70 kilometers from my hometown, making daily travel impossible. Fortunately, I had a friend already working in that city, so I arranged to stay with him. Little did I know that this decision would soon become one of my biggest regrets. It had only been 2 days since I'd moved into my friend's place. On the third day, after returning from work, I found my friend already home, fast asleep. Not wanting to disturb him, I quietly had my dinner and went to bed. There's something I should mention. My room had a balcony where pigeons often gathered during the day. The door to the balcony was always shut, but that night, I noticed it was open. I figured my friend must have left it that way, so I closed it and went to bed without much thought. I'd only been asleep for about an hour when I heard a knock on the balcony door. I woke up, assuming it was just a pigeon, so I ignored it and went back to sleep. But a few minutes later, the knock came again. This time I got irritated, thinking, if it happens again, I'll open the door and shoo the pigeons away. But the moment I decided to stay awake and wait for the knock, there was nothing but silence. After a while, with no noise, I let my guard down and tried to sleep again. But 2 minutes later, there was another knock. Frustrated, I threw the door open, only to find no pigeons. Feeling uneasy, I brushed it off, assuming they had flown away. The following day, I learned a lockdown was going to be enforced within 2 days, so my friends and I decided to return to our hometowns. 2 months later, when the lockdown restrictions eased, I called my friends to return to the flat. They told me they were still working from home. So I went back alone, but invited 2 friends from my hometown to stay with me. The next day, the 3 of us settled into the flat. Since my friends were working remotely, we often stayed up until 2 or 3 a.m. One night while I was sleeping, I had the eerie sensation that someone else was in the room. I thought it was one of my friends, but when I checked, there was no one there. That's when I experienced sleep paralysis. Those unfamiliar with it, it's when your brain is still asleep, but your eyes are open, and you can see everything, but you can't move or speak. The next day, I didn't mention it to my friends, assuming it was just a case of sleep paralysis. But later, one of my friends also experienced sleep paralysis while sleeping in my room, yet didn't bring it up, thinking it was a coincidence. Then, my third friend stayed in my room and had the same experience. But again, no one said a word. One day, while a friend was working in my room, I decided to prank him. My other friend and I knocked loudly on the door, but there was no reaction. We figured he was wearing headphones and left it at that. An hour later, he angrily confronted us, asking why we had just tried to scare him. We were confused because we had knocked on his door an hour earlier, not just then. A few days later, another friend came over with his dog. We spent the day playing with the dog, and that night we planned to watch a movie. One friend who had some work to finish opted to work in the living room while the rest of us watched the movie. Around 1 a.m., the dog suddenly started barking frantically and hid under the bed, staring at the living room while still barking. That's when I noticed a shadow. Initially, I thought it was my friend, but then I remembered, dogs don't bark at familiar faces. I'd also heard animals could sense things humans couldn't, so I started feeling uneasy. We continued living together for 2 more months until offices began reopening, and we all eventually went our separate ways. Later, when my original flatmate returned, we all got together for a catch-up. I told them about the YouTube channel I had started, where I share horror stories, and asked if anyone had experienced anything spooky. That's when my friend, who owned the flat, dropped a bombshell. "That room you stayed in," he said, "was haunted." I was stunned. He went on to explain that a year before I moved in, strange things had happened in that room. When he first moved into the flat 4 years ago, his job was 19 kilometers away, so he mostly came home to eat and sleep. He had 2 dogs, and every night at exactly 1 a.m., they would start barking, especially near the balcony. This went on for a week, every night at the same time. One night, he even heard footsteps on the wooden floor, someone pacing around his room. He was awake but too scared to move, hoping it would stop. He, too, experienced sleep paralysis, where he saw an old woman with wild, curly hair and a disturbing smile crawling towards him, eventually screaming in his face. This continued for a month until he had a priest perform a cleansing ritual. Things finally returned to normal after that. But the creepiest part? His dogs never entered that room. They always stopped at the door and barked, but refused to go inside. The same behavior we noticed with my friend's dog. Turns out, we had all been living with something paranormal without even realizing it. My friend hadn't told us earlier because he didn't want to scare us. So that's it for today, guys. We'll be back next week with another creepy story. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like and subscribe for more horror stories. And if you have a story of your own to share, let us know in the comments. We might make a video about it. Until next time, bye.